Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Parenting Hour. You're tuned in to Unity FM 93.5 here in the West Midlands and 105.1 to our listeners that are tuned in on Inspire FM. Welcome to you also, wherever you are in UK or outside UK. Welcome to our app listeners as well. I know it's great to, downloading the app and listening to this show or any of the shows on Unity FM, wherever you are on the go, indeed, inshallah. I hope you're healthy and well and keeping safe and enjoying the new year. A little bit cold, a little bit wet where we are in the West Midlands, but alhamdulillah, we're on the other side now. We're towards the new year, or towards springtime, I should say. We've passed the new year. So now it's spring and we can think of the days getting longer and maybe some sunshine, inshallah. I can see my guest has some sunshine in her window, mashallah. I don't have any here, but we're not that far apart. It just depends where we are in the country, indeed, of where we're getting some sunshine. Today, we're going to be talking about school admissions. And we're talking about school admissions because there's a closing date for primary school admissions is this weekend coming. And I have the best person when it comes to talking about schools and admissions with me. And you know, we've often had Rebecca with us before, Rebecca Williams. Assalamu alaikum and welcome, Rebecca.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Thank you for having me, Kathleen.
You're my person I always go to when we're talking about schools because you're so knowledgeable about this and it's just so hard to keep up with everything. And I know we will do a program later on about secondary school admissions because parents may get a little bit panicky now and thinking, secondary, haven't done that secondary school form. Is it secondary school already? And it's not. Don't worry, parents. You still have time for that. And we will do a show to remind you about that, inshallah. But we're talking about primary school admissions. So, can you give us a little bit of a background about primary school admissions and why why parents need to apply for this? It's not an automatic thing, I assume?
So it's not automatic at all. In fact, even if your child is at a nursery at a primary school, you still need to complete the form to attend that primary school for reception. So the applications that are open at the moment for primary school, the closing date, as you pointed out, is the 15th of January, and that's Sunday. I would always recommend trying to get this done well before Friday, though, so that you're within a working day. And if there are any problems with the form, which is an online form, or any technical issues or anything you need clarity for, it's going to be very difficult to get that on a Sunday from the council offices. So good idea to get that done during the week in the next few days. And then hopefully if there have been any glitches or any problems or any issues with uploading your information, that could be solved in plenty of time. Because, and I'm talking specifically really about Birmingham City Council, I know that you do have listeners from around the country, and that date may be slightly different for other councils, but it will be at around a similar time. And then all councils will generally give the child the, school application confirmation when we get to April, and that date is going to just vary slightly, obviously, between local authorities. For secondary school, it's quite different. It's more nationally standardised because for those of you who've got older children, you would apply for secondary school by the 31st of October. Remember, that's Halloween. By then, when your child is in year 6. And the national offer day is the 1st of March, or the next working day of the 1st of March, for example, falls on a weekend. So going back to primary school, we've got a few days, and it is a huge decision. Often we tend to focus on secondary schools, but primary school is a really important part of your child's growing up and formative years. Children start reception usually the September after they've turned 4. So, for example, if your child is born on the 10th of September, they would start reception the next September when they're almost 5. If your child is born on the 30th of August, then your child would start just a few days really after their 4th birthday. So it's the September that happens after your child is 4. And of course, the majority of children do attend a nursery place before that, usually from the term after they're 3 and sometimes earlier. So again, one of the common misconceptions is my child is at the nursery in the school, so they will just go on to reception. I don't need to make a form. And that, of course, has caused tragedies in the past when parents then realise that they needed to fill in that form to get the place. So the way it's done in Birmingham is generally you're expected to apply online. So I'm sure that the parents who are listening who have children who have had their 4th birthday in between September and next September will have already looked at the online form. And that would be, the case in most local authorities, that you would be expected now to apply online. And sometimes the school or your local library can offer support with that process if necessary. But generally, I think over the years, it's become easier and easier to get that form made. The national offer day for primary is actually the 17th of April. So that's just going to come to us just before Eid. You'll get an Eid al-Fitr, you'll get your offer, and that is the timetable. There are potential options for children who are born in summer to request a deferred entry. This is unusual, but fully understandable, because from my own experience, children who are born in summer, particularly in July and August, are obviously a lot younger than the rest of the cohort, and parents may feel or choose that they would like to defer that entry, and then the child would enter the school in year 1. So they wouldn't enter the school in reception, they'd enter in year 1 instead. And actually, to be honest, that, people, oh, why would I do that? But I really do think it works. And I've got to be honest that on a personal level, I did something similar with my youngest son, who's now a teenager, but being born in July and being a boy, and boys, as we know, tend to mature a little later than girls in terms of language development in particular, didn't really start school until year 2, actually. It was an in-year entry, and was home educated, and had the opportunity of, despite pretty much being one of the youngest in his year, feeling that he could gain confidence in his abilities, that he could win, that he could do things well. Whereas one of the things that can happen when a very late summer child, and more particularly a boy's language development, is usually a little later than girls educationally, not all the time, but often, their first experience of school will be being perhaps given tasks in reading and writing that are quite high level for them to manage, and therefore their experience becomes an experience of not doing well, or an experience of failure, so to speak. So I fully understand why more and more parents are starting to talk about deferring to year 1 for a summer child and letting them develop. We're talking, of course, about state school admission, and some parents do choose independent, private, fee-paying schools instead, which are going to have different timescales for entry, and which in some cases may have initial assessments or interviews with the parents for entry. So I think, our session today is more focused on applying for the state schools and the state school admission process. But certainly within the state school curriculum and the early years foundation stage curriculum, I think there's a little bit more of a movement that is perhaps questioning how such formal learning is ultimately helpful in the long run. So when I say, my son was young, my son started in year 2, and when he started in year 2, he was just learning to write his name, and he was just learning to read. By the end of year 2, he'd finished all of the Harry Potter books. This is not saying, that's amazing. This is just me saying that sometimes when you let a child creatively grow at their own pace, then when it is time for them to read and it is time for them to write, they will grasp it, and they'll do so confidently. So I hope that's a little bit of calm for parents who maybe think, oh, my child is going to school, they must read, they must write. In most of the world, formal learning, and in fact, in the way that Islamic education was traditionally delivered, formal education of that sort did not start until 6 or 7 at the very earliest. So I suppose that brings us to, I maybe diverged a little bit there on admissions,
it's really good,
but it brings us to the whole thoughts and ideas of what we're looking for in a school for a child.
Exactly. And just before we go into that, I mean, and I don't think a lot of parents know that you can diverge and not apply. But when you do apply,
you have to apply, but then you can tick a box.
You have to apply. Okay. Yeah. And when you do let your child go, it will be in that same age group then. It's not that they're held back a year or anything like this.
No, they would go into year 1 and they wouldn't have therefore attended reception. There are negatives to doing that because they'll go into a more formal learning environment without having had the experience of an informal full-time school environment beforehand. So it really is, you're going to be dependent on how the parent feels about that educationally. And you can only defer if your child is born in the summer term.
Okay, and that would be the summer term, anytime the summer term. And I can see how parents, I've had like summer term, you're talking about June, July, August, or just July, August, September.
Well, that's an interesting one
Isn't it?
because
Yes,
technically the summer term can start at all sorts of different times depending on when Easter is. So we're certainly including May in the summer term. It's pretty much, anybody who's born after Easter that year, I guess.
After Easter. Okay, that clarifies it indeed. And I can definitely empathize with you with two children actually being born in that, and both of them being boys as well, how that could make a difference. And it could, like what you say, be beneficial to them. You were very lucky to be able to do that, in that you were able to home educate, you were able to be there with them. Some of our parents may like to do that, but actually have to work or maybe not able to do it.
And to be fair, I was working, and we went 3 days a week to a wonderful friend who was home educating hers, and her son was the same age. So I was fortunate to continue working through that time. Okay. But again, my work is flexible. So yes.
And which is interesting, again, that parents are thinking of options maybe from this show that they might never have thought about before. So it doesn't mean giving up work, or it doesn't mean, and each child, of course, is very different, and each parent or each circumstance is different. Yes. And what you're saying here is trying to get the right thing for the right child.
Yes, I mean, the whole way in which children from even below 4 are pushed into formal reading and writing is perhaps a topic for another full show, but it's one that's quite close to my heart. For parents who are listening and who are quite interested in exploring this, there's a wonderful a documentary which was produced probably over 10 years ago, which you can get on YouTube, and it's called Too Much, Too Young. And it's Dispatches documentary, and it is really eye-opening. It looks at children in the UK whose formal learning and education starts far earlier than most of the world, and then it looks at children elsewhere, including in Europe and Eastern Europe, where the children will not start that level of formal learning until they're 7. At the age of 11, the children who had started formal learning later, the children who had deferred, the children who had spent more of their younger childhood engaged in play and creative tasks and exploration in a different way, were actually performing far higher educationally than the average British child was, who'd been pushed into that formal learning. And then if you look at countries which are very much topping the world tables educationally, such as Finland, for example, those children do not start formal reading and writing until they are 7. So it's interesting, and it's a tricky one, because I know many teachers who agree with me, and myself. Obviously, I tutor English, and I can have children come in who can read, who can write, but I'm looking for something deeper. I'm looking for understanding, comprehension, questioning, interest in the world, creativity, imagination. Those things have to take place as part of the play stage. They're an important part of child development. So I suppose that leads us to the decisions we make when choosing schools, because although state schools certainly do have to follow the national curriculum, many will have quite different values, ethos, and approaches in doing so. And I suppose it brings us to the decisions that we make. And when making decisions about schools, I think there are 2 main areas we look at as parents. And the first one, which is perhaps the easy one, is the data. So we look at the school data. I can get to that. Numbers, facts, figures, assessment, attainment, attendance, all that kind of data. And that can sometimes be useful. It's part of the bigger picture, I guess. But then there's the other reasons why we would choose a school to, entrust the care of our child to, which is a very big thing for us parents. And that is the things that are not data. The things that, you don't have facts and figures and numbers for. And that's when we get to, for example, the values and the ethos. And for everything that I've just said, what does the school think about that? What do they think about the value of play? Is there an outdoor area? I was reading something quite fascinating recently about how having green space and having trees around them really impacts on childhood development and indeed academic attainment.
Oh.
Yeah, and there's actually been research done for that. And so, you know, a school and the leaders and teachers can't help it if they have no greenery around. But, I'm not blaming them. It is the reality of being in a city. But for me as a parent, I would bizarrely always choose the school with the grass and green and the trees above one with higher results and nothing to look out on except concrete and brick. That just matters to me. It just matters to me from a holistic perspective, mental health and emotional perspective, and even better, schools that actively promote outdoor play. And there are many schools actually, more so in Birmingham. I know that Moor Green Primary, for example, has a forest school, and I'm sure many others, because they're relatively close to an area of forest that they take the children into, and they put their big plastic overalls on and they can play and they can, trees are immensely, I think, important. I think they're healing. And I think that's a really good place for your child to spend their childhood around, amongst the trees, amongst the grass, in a natural environment. So all of those things cannot be measured by data. Yeah, I think we should get to them. So I think to start with the easy bit, for those parents who are looking for data on schools and who want to obviously, understandably, check the attainment and the academic achievement of the pupils within that school, the best way to get information on that is to type into Google DFE performance data. That will take you straight to gov.uk/school. This is a long thing. The best thing is just type in performance data DFE. And then you can check the performance of schools and colleges in English, remembering, of course, that we're just coming out of the pandemic. And certainly, though we're talking about primary, there were no SATs exams for a few years. So we don't have clear 3 years of data, obviously, in that case. And then it gets to find a school or college on the next page. And you can type in, of course, the name of the school or college, location, postcode. What I tend to do is click local authority, and I would then type in Birmingham. Now, Birmingham is the largest local authority in Europe with, as you can imagine, a huge number of schools. It's quite incredible. And so there's a lot of schools to think about there. But if you type in Birmingham and you search, then you're going to get all of the schools in alphabetical order. You can even click view on a map, and that helps you to sort of look at where you live around Birmingham and see which schools are around you. Then click on primary school, and I could see all of the primary schools. I can move them into, for example, religious character. I could check just the ones that are Catholic, or just the ones that are, it says Islam actually. And then there's another one that says Muslim. I think somebody in the DFE is confused, but I would click Islam and I would click Muslim. Presume to find the Muslim schools if I was looking for that. Or I could just sort by people gender, which would be very unusual for a primary school to have a single gender school. I'm not aware of any state primary schools that do. Or I could sort by Ofsted rating and so on. So when I've got the schools, it's really clear. I can see them in front of me and I can see them in alphabetical order. I can click on the school and I can then have a look at their assessment data. Now, unfortunately, the only one I can view at the moment is the 2019 data. That might not necessarily reflect the school's current performance, but to be fair, in many cases it will. Yes, because I mean, it was only 4 years ago, or less than 4 years ago, really, that they took the SATs. And then I can look at that. It's actually, the DFE have done a good job of making it very colour-coded, making it very clear. I'm looking, for example, at the first school alphabetically in Birmingham. So it was the first A school, and that's Abbey Catholic Primary School. And I can see, for example, that in 2019, the pupils meeting the expected standard in reading, writing, and maths was 65%, compared to the Birmingham average of 62%. The pupils achieving at a higher standard in these subjects was 15%, compared to the local authority average of 9%. And I can click and, find out more about this school. There's full details of reading, writing, maths, and so on. And so I would definitely recommend the DFE performance tables for those parents who want to drill down and understand a little more. I should note, though, that to be fair to schools, if a school is very small and it only has, let's say, 30 children per year, as a small school will, then each child is going to be a significant percentage point, which is over 3%. So those small schools can see big changes in their results from year to year, depending on that small cohort. Obviously, if you've got a big school with 150 per year, then each child is going to be less than 1%, and the results are not going to vary as widely. So it's worth parents knowing that. I don't know if you had any other questions that parents might ask on data, or just looking at the numbers and the data and the figures.
Well, it's very interesting that there is so much knowledge out there from your desk or your phone or whatever, that you actually can get all that knowledge to empower you to know what's going on around data, and then to be able to distinguish it down or break it down. So if parents are looking up this, and I'm sure you're going to talk to this in a little bit, and they're saying, okay, this data is really good for this school, but it's not in my area, or something else about this school that's really good that I really like, and you mentioned Muslim or Islam or whatever, that they're one of these schools, and I was thinking of this of sending my child to this, but it's not in my area.
Yeah.
Would they still be able to apply to those schools, or do they have to apply in the catchment area? Because you said that you'll see the schools in your area when you look at the map.
Some local authorities, which have more rural parts to them, such as Solihull, which has some outlying rural areas and villages, have catchment areas, so specific delegated areas on a map that belong to a certain school. But Birmingham, being obviously very built up metropolitan area, does not. It is very much about cut-off distance, distance in a straight line between your residence and the school. And that's usually how the majority of schools admit. Obviously, there are differences, and that's particularly the case with schools that have a religious character. So the one that I just talked about, the Abbey, for example, is a Catholic school. And therefore, there's going to be an oversubscription criteria whereby they will give priority to baptized Catholic children, and maybe specifically baptized Catholic children within a certain parish. Yeah. And so you do need to check. I mean, the best thing for this and more data is to go to the Birmingham website, or simply to type in Birmingham Primary Admissions Booklet into Google, and you'll get a very, very long booklet. I'm scrolling through it. There's about 450 pages in this booklet, but fear not, you do not have to read all of the pages. It's like the Da Vinci Code. But anyway, it's quite well done, because I've got it here in front of me on the other screen, and you can click on any school you want. So I can look at a school and I can click on it. Okay, so I'm just going to click on Town Junior. I know that's in the centre of Sutton Coldfield, and I know that's not a religious school, so it's just no, it's complicated. It's a junior school. Let me not click on that. Okay, let me click on something else. Right. I'm looking at Tiverton Academy. Tiverton Academy is around the Selly Oak area. It's not a religious school, and it doesn't have any particularly unusual criteria. So as with all schools, the first criteria would be that a child who is looked after will receive priority for admission. And that usually would be that child is in care, social services care, for example, having an allocated foster carer. And that's a very, very, very tiny proportion of children. But if a child were in that position, then they would have immediate priority in pretty much all school subscription criteria. Then it goes to section B, which is children for whom it's essential to be admitted to that school because of special circumstances, significant medical or social needs. I mean, one example might be that the child uses a wheelchair and needs to have a school with access, or that is all on a ground floor that has wheelchair compatible classroom entrance and so on. But again, that is a very, very, very tiny proportion of children that would have that kind of medical letter naming the school particularly as being the school they need. Then we go on to C, which is usually children who will have a sibling within the school. And then we go to D, which for Tiverton says children of staff. That's a little bit unusual, but sometimes it could be on that children of staff get a priority for understandable practical reasons, I presume. And then we go to E, which is children living nearest to the school. And it's a straight line measurement. Of course, you can email Birmingham Admissions, and you can ask them, this is my address. What is the straight line measurement between my school that I want and my home? And that will give you a really good understanding. Looking here, I'm just randomly selected Tiverton Academy. I could see that last year it was 2,148 metres for the last child admitted. So that would give me a good idea.
That is a great lot of information that we've got just before the break. And we're going to break now, listeners. Go into a commercial break. I would advise you get a pen and paper to jot down some of this information after the break, because we're going to go back and talk more about data and more about values and other things you'll be looking for from a school and their ethos, inshallah. Please grab a pen and paper after this break. Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum, parents, and welcome back to Parenting Hour. You're tuned into Unity FM 93.5 here in the West Midlands and 105.1 if you're tuned into us in Milton Keynes or Luton. We're talking about school admissions, primary school admissions this evening. We're doing this on Tuesday, just before the closing date on Sunday the 15th. And I know it may, as Rebecca said, that it may be different in your area. It's really important for you to look up this now to do an application, inshallah. If you're listening to the repeat show on Sunday morning and you haven't done it yet, I would say get onto this computer quickly, because you've only got another couple of hours to do this. Indeed, it does need to be done, even as Rebecca said in the earlier part of the show, if your child is in a nursery, in a school, and you thought that your child will just automatically go into that primary school, you still need to do an application. And even if you want to defer your child for the following year because they were born in the summertime, you still need to do an application. Is that right, Rebecca? I've picked it all up right. Great.
No, if you want to defer, then you put in the application at the right time, as if your child were starting in September. But if you want to delay it for a year, you still have to put in the application, and then of course your child will be given a place to start in year one rather than in reception. So it still needs to go in. I think that getting the word out, and I'm sure most of the parents who are listening will have filled in their form and they're listening, or they'll be on the process of filling in their form, because you can fill in your form, you can go back, you can edit, and you can have a think about, change things around. And I'm sure parents are doing that when you do it online. You can do that until you actually press the big button to say, I'm making my final application. But I think there is, an ongoing problem, I think, with communication. We have a very large city, as I said earlier. It is the biggest local authority in Birmingham, in Europe. And there are every year at least hundreds, possibly thousands of parents within the city who perhaps have not received the information. And this often is a problem where parents are perhaps new to the UK, or not familiar with the system, or do not speak English themselves, as a fluent language yet. And so I think everybody listening to the show, whether you have a child in this age group or not, just go onto your little WhatsApp groups, mention it in your local masjid, mention it to people you know, to neighbours, to relatives, mention that this is the deadline coming up for primary school application. Have you completed the form. And I think obviously as a community, each of us can help each other out. That's how the world goes round. We each help each other out whenever we can. And so I would say, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh, I wonder if that sister in the masjid has applied. I think her child is 4. I wonder if my neighbour has applied. Just ask them, just, help them out and make sure that people have applied, because it can lead to very difficult consequences for families when they realise that they have applied too late, and therefore they can sometimes be, in that case, offered a school that could be 3 bus rides away on the other side of a city, causing long-term difficulty and hardships. So really trying to get out the information that the deadline is the 15th of January to apply for a primary school place. For those who have children who are currently in year 5, when they're in year 6, you'll need to apply by the 31st of October for the secondary school place. We were just talking about data and research as being one of the ways in which we make a decision about a primary school. And obviously it's almost like sort of a big research task, particularly in a city like Birmingham with so many hundreds of schools around us. And one thing that I'd mentioned was that you can go to the DFE performance tables. You can click for local authority Birmingham. It gives you all, click primary, or you'll get all the secondary as well. And it gives you them all in alphabetical order. You can click map view, then you can actually see visually the schools that are around you. Then, as another piece of data, parents need to go and Google Birmingham primary admissions booklet, and they should be able to get that document, which is a nice PDF document. You can click through it. You can click on a school name. So, for example, earlier, just as chance, I happened to click on Tiverton, and I was able to see the cut-off distance in meters of the last child admitted last year who was not a sibling. There are some schools which have different oversubscription criteria, particularly religious schools. Obviously, will have different criteria for admission. And if you just click on any primary school within that big Birmingham admissions booklet, it will take you to that primary school and explain the admissions and what you have to do. Some schools, you do have to fill in an additional form, particularly for religious schools. For example, particularly if you're applying for an Islamic school, you might have to tick in forms. You might even have to get a letter or notification from the imam of your masjid to say that you attend it, for example. There are various requirements for each school, but by going to the Birmingham admissions booklet for primary schools, you'll be able to see each of them displayed quite clearly. So we've got a lot of things in front of us, I guess, now as parents. We've got the map of the schools, we've got the list of the schools, we've looked at the performance data, we're thinking about achievement and attainment, and I think in a little bit we're going to talk about the things that are not data that we look at in a school, the ethos and values. But now we've got to make sure that we have an application that will work, and obviously we'll give our child a school place and a school that we would be happy with. There are only 3 schools that you can put down in Birmingham for primary school now. It is put down 3 primary schools, and they are got to be placed in order of preference. So sometimes parents might go to a school open day, and the head teacher might say, "You must put our school first." And the parents think, "Well, if I don't put this school first, I will not get it." It doesn't quite work like that. So you put it in order of preference. So the school that you really, really want, even if perhaps you might not get into it, even if perhaps it's not your closest school, if you've got a good chance, you think you've got a reasonable chance, looking at the criteria, looking at the distance of your house from that school, looking at whether you would have got in last year, if you think you're in with a reasonable chance, you can put that first. And then you put your next best school second. You've just got to make sure that the 3rd school you put in, you're pretty certain of getting a place at. Because otherwise what will happen is, if a parent puts 3 schools and they are not eligible for any of them, then the local authority will simply allocate a place at a school that's got places left. That could be 8 miles away. It could be a totally different part of the city, and it could be really not the school you wanted, and it will just be the school that has places left. So we don't want to be in that position, and therefore I would always say, make sure the last school on your list is indeed a school that you've got a safe place at, based on the admissions criteria, previously where you live, how you fit in with that criteria. It's important. And yet it is tricky. But I think that brings us to also another area of research, which is looking at travel and transport too. And every family will have its own opinions and views on, what they want to do in terms of transport and travel. It is possible for parents to put down schools in other local authorities. If you are on the edge of Birmingham, for example, if you're in Acox Green or Hall Green, you'll know that you're right on the edge of Solihull. You can look at the Solihull primary admissions booklet. You can do some research and see if your child could maybe get into a school you prefer in Solihull. And again, similarly in other outlying areas of Birmingham where you could just go over the border and be at another school. And sometimes there are schools that are a little bit further to drive, but are excellent and might have places. I'm afraid it's just all about research and research, making the phone calls or sending the emails to the local authorities for their data. These days, a lot of it is just there for you to look at on the internet, but it could be quite useful to do that.
There's a lot of information there indeed, but as you're saying, if the earlier you start and the earlier you do this research, the more information you have to be able to make those choices.
So I'm sure there are parents listening whose children are maybe only 2 or 3, but hopefully this has been of a little bit of help. They might start researching, looking at that, and starting to make some plans as well. Sometimes people even, decide on where they're going to live according to where the schools are. I would say sometimes, I'd say often actually, for those who have the choice or decision, it's worth before, putting that offer in on a rental or property to buy, to think, right, and which schools are near here? Even if your child's only a baby, of course, that's something that parents would take into account when they're making those decisions.
Definitely it is. So there's a lot there to comprehend and to weave your way through. And we're just still talking about data really, and doing the application form and putting things on that application form. Is there a lot of people, before we go on to ethos and values of school, is there a lot of people that do put first, second preference, but don't actually get it and have to go to their third preference? Does that happen? A lot of people, do you know?
I think in some areas, particularly where there's a very high density of children within Birmingham. Birmingham's the youngest city in Europe. I mean, not only the largest local authority, we're breaking a few records here. We're also the youngest city in Europe, with 40% of Birmingham's residents being under 25. It is a very, very young city. And that explains why there's so many schools, and so many schools that have expanded and added additional classes in recent years as well. So we are a big city, we're a very metropolitan urban city, and that means that it is very possible that schools will get heavily oversubscribed. I'm just going to have a look at a school that I know well, to be fair. It's an excellent school. It's called Nelson Mandela, and I'm just finding it on the list because I know that it's in a heavily populated area in Sparkbrook, and it's also historically been a very high attaining school as well. So if I have a look, in 2020, the last child who wasn't a sibling admitted into Nelson Mandela lived 484 meters away. That's not very far, is it?
No.
Things did improve, actually.
Meters here, yes.
Just to avoid putting everybody off, the cut-off distance has got wider since then. But obviously, you go to the form, you look at the school, and you think, oh, I'm only just round the corner. But then you'd be surprised that there's a lot of other children your child's age who are also just living around the corner too, and who also want a place at the school. So some schools are heavily oversubscribed, and that's why the Birmingham admissions booklet, the document online, is so useful, because I can scroll down, and again, there are some schools where all applicants are offered every year. You can be absolutely, confident of a place there. And then again, others where you have to really be living within a few streets of the school in order to get that place. So yeah, if parents have perhaps not, done the research and looked at whether they are likely to get a place, it's very, very possible and relatively common that they would not get any of the 3 preferences. And therefore, I can understand from the point of view of the local authority, what will the local authority do? Once they've allocated everyone's places, they're going to give you the places that are left, which could be 8 miles away. And so that's why it is important to look at where you live. And it's not the distance on, Google Maps, because that's your driving distance. It is the as the crow flies distance. There are some websites that show that, but if you want the exact distance, for example, if you feel you're near the edge, it's best to contact admissions@birmingham.gov.uk, email them and say, this is my address. And how far am I according to your data systems from this school? So you've got the clear meters. In the list of schools you're interested in, I'm sure they'd be happy to tell you how many meters away you are, because that makes things a lot easier when it comes to allocating admissions, because you'll have chosen a school that it's possible to get admitted to.
Great. This is a lot of information. Parents, I know most of you have done your application forms already. Maybe haven't pressed the final submit button, and you're rethinking again now after listening to this program. You still have time to
and you can still edit that. You can still go back on and edit and resubmit until the deadline. Yeah.
Great, which is good news for parents. You mentioned earlier on about it's not just the data, it's just not just the results, but we also may want an environment that is adhered to whatever environment, home family environment that we think of, adhere to our values, adhere to our ethos, adhere to each family is very different in this. How would parents find out that about school, especially if it's a first-time child,
Yes.
and they may not know anybody in the area, and it's difficult. How do you go around
I think
finding
the
out that?
first thing to do is, before finding anything out, is as a family to sit down and decide what matters to you, what is important, what are you actually looking for? Because if we're not sure what we're really looking for in a school, then we won't find it. So every family is going to have a different list for that. What's really going to matter to them as parents in terms of what the school provides. And every child, even within a family, may need a different environment, particularly if the child has special educational needs or disabilities, then that's going to be an important factor. In addition, a child might, some children might really thrive in a very, very small school, small environment where they know everybody and it's small, whereas other children would thrive far better in a big school, which has got lots of sets and lots of classes and will stretch them, push them, have a big social pool to choose from. So every child is different, every family is different. And I think, sitting down and writing down, say, 4 things that really, really matter to you as a family. I know, for example, with some families, it really is important to them that the food served in the canteen is halal, for example. And yet I genuinely sent my children to village schools where that wasn't an option, but my children ate a vegetarian diet. Yeah, obviously, food. That wasn't number one on my priority, but I fully respect that that's important and a priority for other parents. So as we go through, we look at what's important. I mentioned earlier that for me, in terms of my outlook as a parent, having grass, having trees, having a green environment was really important to me because, particularly in the winter months, your child is at primary school for all of the daylight hours. And I wanted them to be in a green environment, even if that meant sending them to somewhere where the academic attainment was not as high as the one that looked out over concrete and brick. That was my opinion, and parents might think, well, that's not important, I'll take them to the park, or we've got a nice garden, or, that's fine. So everybody's going to have their own criteria. And I would say go through your criteria and then start to research. It's very difficult to research by simply asking parents at the school. But again, it's something that I'm sure most people will do. They will say to parents, how have you found the school? How have you found the teachers and the leadership? How approachable are they? Of course, every parent has a different experience. And some parents might have an awful experience and really dislike a school, whereas many other parents are extremely happy with it. So, you've got to take that almost with a pinch of salt. But yes, I think talking to other parents, talking to people in the locality about how they found it, specifically not just saying to others, how did you find the school, but specifically asking about certain things. How are the children with special needs treated at the school? What are the other pupils like at the school? Are they kind? How does the school, for example, acknowledge Ramadan or Eid? Yeah, and on all of those questions that tell you something. When my children, and they're all 3 are adults now, as teenagers, when they were young, one question that I asked their primary school is, if my child wants to pray, particularly in the winter months, they do need to pray in the lunchtime, is that okay? And the reaction of the school mattered to me, because no, 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 no is a bit of a red light. And that was important to me. And when my oldest son, who's now 24, he went to a primary school in a village outside of Birmingham, and we were living in Birmingham at the time. And in the whole of his key stage, that's across 4 year groups, he was one of only 2 Muslims within that school. But when I said to the school, can my child pray? They said, yes, we have a room. He can bring in a prayer mat and he can pray. I knew that they would respect him. And he was respected, and very, very, very happy there. So, and yet there are obviously some schools which are 99% Muslim, and would never let your child pray, I would be honest. So, it's about the questions and the comfort that you feel in asking those questions and probing those things. If you have a child who is, for example, also very academically able, does the school have the ability to meet them at their level, to allow them to grow and to spread their wings without constraint? How are they going to manage that? If your child has special needs, how will the school support them? All of those questions, having them ready, being able to talk to the school, being able to ask the school. If your child does have special educational needs, I would always recommend asking to speak to the SENDCO, the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Coordinator, which would be a member of staff in the school responsible overall, and having a discussion with the SENDCO, because you may as well be honest. These are my child's needs, and get an honest answer. Rather than just hope that the school will meet them. It's better to make sure that they're actually attend a school that will. And sometimes if we look at the DFE performance tables, for example, the school with the very, very top results might not be the right school for your child to thrive and to do well. So there are a lot of questions to ask. I think I mentioned things like forest school, sports, other extracurricular activities. For example, if your child played an instrument or was very musical, all of these things that you take into account, that you have ready to find out about. Some schools have very wide websites where a lot of this information will actually just be available at the touch of a browser button. And some require a little bit of investigating. I wouldn't say, though, that the school with the best website is the best school. It's not always the case. When your child is small, it is the human touch that matters. This is the actual care of the teachers and the leaders within that school for your child, more than a fancy website or even results. If you had a choice between a school that was really going to care for your child and make them feel valued and confident and accept them for who they are, and a school that had higher results, then obviously I know which one I'd go for. I'd go for the first one, because a child who's happy and a child who feels secure and a child who feels they can trust the caregivers and the teachers within school will academically do far better than a child who doesn't feel secure in that environment.
We often say that indeed you have to look after their emotional intelligence before you look after their academic intelligence. And it's so true there that we want our children to feel safe, and we want a school is like a home from home in a way. You are giving your child to somebody and kind of subcontracting them for that period of time to teach your child. So it's important. If you were bringing somebody into the home to cook for you, for example, you would make sure that you would vet them, and that what is their cooking credentials, and are they able to cook? Do they know what is the difference between healthy food and not healthy food? There's a lot of things. So why are we not doing the same thing for our children?
You can feel ethos. I mean, years ago, I did a little bit of work with Nishkam. It was actually the high school rather than the primary. It is a Sikh school, religiously the ethos is Sikh. And they had this most wonderful canteen. It was sort of benches and trestle tables. The food served there being vegetarian. And practicing Sikhs don't eat eggs, so it's also, egg-free and vegetarian. And the teachers actually, the staff sat and ate with the children. It was the food was cooked by ladies who, it was ladies as far as I could see. Maybe there were some men as well, but the food was cooked by people with whom you could feel that there was love and care going into that food. Now, I know that, on Unity FM, many of the listeners will be Muslim and maybe not have considered to see school. But, look wider. Think about these options and think about those things. In fact, for Nishkam Primary School, which is in Birmingham as well, they do have a faith-based criteria for children who are initiated in their respective religion. not necessarily Sikhism, but for example, who attend the mosque, have a letter from the Imam, for example, and they also have open places which are not related to religion. I'm not here, advertising a primary school. I'm just saying that this was my experience, and looking at that ethos, looking at the care, it really does matter. Because your child needs to feel secure. And you, as a parent, more than anything, I've learned this with my 5 children, sometimes the hard way. You, as a parent, need to trust the school when you put your child in their care. You need to trust that they've got your child's back and they want the best for your child. And you need to develop that relationship of trust. And obviously, the vast majority of schools do also want to work with you in that position and also want your child to do as well as they possibly could and want to care for your child. So, yeah, it's just about making sure that that starts well.
That starts well. And as you mentioned, each person needs to know, and each couple, each family needs to know their values. And I often find, we talk about this in pre-marriage courses when the young people don't know their values to start off in life as a married couple. But it comes up values starting school. What is important to you as a family? And that child that you're thinking of now may have different importance or different requirements to your older child who is 10 years older, for example. So it's important to revisit this and make sure that we're doing the best.
And every child is different. So if you're really looking for a school that is very play-based, it's a very sort of loose holistic ethos that maybe does not set a great deal of homework, that is not so formal, but then you send your child to schools very formal and academically focused, it's not necessarily the school's fault when you're unhappy. It's like me saying, turning up at a pizza place and getting annoyed that they don't have sushi. It's just, I need to choose the right place for what I want. And that's important from the outset.
Exactly. Well, we've covered a lot today. We're nearly at the end of today's show already, would you believe? Is there any top tips that you can give parents to now that have only got a couple of days or a couple of hours if they're listening to this on Sunday to complete that form?
Well, I think the first thing is to make a list of what's important to you as a family about the school. Hopefully the website, the parents, the school itself, if you've got enough time, because I know some are listening with much younger children, will help you to establish whether your values actually fit in. The next thing to do is obviously go to DFE performance tables and look through all the data to give you a little bit more of an understanding and overview of the schools you're considering. And the next thing to do is to go to the Birmingham admissions booklet or your local authority admissions booklet if you're listening from another local authority. Check through the schools, check whether you meet their admissions criteria, check what's going to be actually feasible to get into.
Brilliant. That is wonderful tips. Jazakallah khairan, Rebecca. And the only thing I can remind listeners, if you haven't yet sent or pressed that submit button, set an alarm, don't put it off and then forget to do it and say, why didn't I do this?
Even the very best parents do that. It happens, we're all human. And so maybe send your little messages out. I was just listening to the radio. Did you know that 15th of January is the deadline for reception places? If we as a community can get that message out, we could prevent a lot of heartache for families down the line. And so it's worth sending that message.
Jazakallah khairan. I knew I was coming to the right person when I invited you as a guest this evening. Jazakallah khairan, Rebecca, for this wonderful information. And we really appreciate this. And our listeners, I'm sure, really appreciate it. Listeners, pass on this message, send it on to your friends and families, inshallah, so that everybody is able to submit a good form in time, inshallah. And may you all get the places that you want and are looking for, inshallah. Ameen. Thank you for listening in. Until next week, Assalamu alaikum.